And nice to meet you. So for everybody that is here, let me introduce Teresa Hsu, who is the executive producer for Awesomeness TV and serves as the showrunner. In case you guys don't know what a showrunner is, it's another word for executive producer and also the person responsible usually for developing, sometimes creating the show for My Dream Quinceañera. Hsu is a Taiwanese American television producer specializing in documentaries and unscripted content. So thank you so much for being here, Teresa. The next person I want to introduce is RJ. And then again, can you pronounce your last name, RJ?
Larese. It's Larese.
Larese. Larese?
Larese.
Larese.
It's like
okay.
the Americanized, non-Italian version of it.
Thank you. And RJ is Vice President, actually, of Talent and Development and Brand Partnerships for Nickelodeon and Awesomeness TV. And then I'll introduce the third person, and you guys can talk a little bit about, the difference between being an executive at a network, being an executive producer on a show. But our last person is Paul J. Medford, and he is Vice President of Live Action Unscripted Content, also for Nickelodeon, it says here, also Awesomeness TV, Paramount Plus, and all of that. So we were having a discussion right before you guys came in about how some of you might actually be interested in finding out what is the difference between being an executive, like at a network or a streaming service, a channel, versus an executive producer of a show. And I think, Paul, you had a really good definition for and description for that. So why don't we start there and then we'll move into the show.
Sure. So an executive producer of a show or a piece of content like Teresa, they are responsible for making the show and all the creative that goes into making the show, the day-to-day running of the show. And they then in turn deliver it to the network executive. And the network executive, like myself or like RJ, we're responsible for a number of shows. So like My Dream Quinceañera is one of our babies, but we have many shows all going on at the same time. And we are responsible for the budget for all of those shows, the casting of all of those shows, and just keeping all the dots connected between the marketing, between the platform, and then just between the success of the show. But we always work very closely with the showrunner or the executive producer to achieve the same dream.
Great. And also, do you, in particular, with a show like this, do you guys come up with an idea internally and then find the right executive producer for it? Or does a person come in as an executive producer and say, we have a great idea, and then you buy that idea from them? Or I'm assuming it's probably both, but just wanted to bring it up just in case it's different than what I believe.
It's both. You can come with an idea, or we can have an idea and then pitch to an executive producer to come on board. In the case of this show, and RJ can correct me if I'm wrong, it was a hugely successful show with like 39 seasons or so. And we were like, we have to make this show again and just elevate it a little bit. And then we looked around for the best producer, and then we met Teresa and was like, only Teresa can make this show. And then Teresa came on board and did an amazing job, as we've seen.
And Paul is correct with that. Awesomeness has existed for years. Paramount bought the company 4 years ago now, but My Dream Quinceañera has been being made for a long period of time. It had its own separate YouTube channel. We've had spin-off shows that have been on our main YouTube channel for Awesomeness, but this was an opportunity to expose this to a bigger audience, people who might not be watching YouTube, and to do a more premium version of the show that also had Maria, who was our amazing party planner. That did not exist in the format before. So that was an update for this version of the show.
Great, thank you for that. So I'll start with you, Teresa. Paul just said you were the only person and the right person to do this particular show. Why do you think he says that? And why do you think you are, if that's the case?
Well, as a woman of color and as a former teenage girl, I think I can relate to our cast better than somebody who doesn't look like me. And I have had a lot of streaming credits. So in terms of how aspirational or glossy or how things are formatted within a streaming format without act breaks and how to launch a new show, you know, and try to break through all this content right now, I have had some experience doing that. So
Excellent. In terms of the network, I'm curious, like you said that this show had already existed on YouTube and then you brought it in. So why did you decide to redo a show that had already been in existence? Was it really to expand the audience, or what was it about the subject matter that interested you for your particular channel? And that could be for any of you, by the way.
The show resonated before. When I started, I've worked at Paramount now for 4 years, but I started with Awesomeness right at the beginning of the pandemic. And my Dream Quinceañera is one of those shows that resonated with Gen Z, where if I'm around with cast members who were on the old seasons of the show, people run up to them and they've become influencers and like minor celebrities in the community because of that show. And actually, when we were casting, the Latinx community, Latinx and Hispanic community knew the show. We didn't have to explain it. People were well aware of it and how it was established from YouTube. And I think that the Latinx and Hispanic audience and the Gen Z audience are really important to us. And this show proved before with millions and millions of views that it was successful and that it meant something to that audience. And so expanding it is a natural next step for it.
Now, why is that audience important to you?
I mean, I think there are a lot of communities that don't see themselves in pieces of content. I am a white man, but I'm a gay man, and I didn't see myself ever in television. And I think that it's important for people who are younger or I mean, of any age really, but really younger and Gen Z people to see themselves in content that's being made. There have not been shows and movies about quinceañeras overwhelmingly. I think HBO Max had one show that they did for a little bit, but this is the longest running, I would imagine, show that's about this topic. You saw my Super Sweet 16, which is also in the family. That was on for many years, but there's something so unique about quinceañeras and the family and the tradition behind it. And I think that if people don't see themselves represented in the content, it's hard for them. And it's, again, meaningful to reach out to the community and also to expose other people to the amazing traditions that exist that they might not have insight into.
And I think to add to what RJ said, I think when I looked at this, I was like, we're coming out of this sort of strange time in the world, and like family, chosen or otherwise, is super important. And this particular show represents that so well. And I think that we just needed that, and everybody needed that in their lives, no matter what culture you come from, Black, you know, Hispanic or whatever, to look at another community and say, yeah, that really is what we need. And that's why I thought this was a show that was definitely worth elevating.
And you know, one thing that I actually really loved about the show, as someone who is not 50 years old, is how multi-generational it was, actually. That it doesn't really matter if you're a teenager or not. I think this is a show that can be viewed by multi-generational families, whether they're grandparents or parents, brothers and sisters, or the actual quinceañera. You know, that I think you guys have created a show, and that in terms of our culture and how important family is to the Latinx community, that it's a show that can be watched together. So I commend you for that, because I thought that was an interesting aspect of it, how sometimes the parents had more to say than the girls in the story, and what they wanted. It's kind of like a wedding, right? You get married for your parents, you really don't get married for yourself. That's what it felt at times. So Teresa, and this might be actually a Teresa and RJ question, but how were the girls actually chosen? What was that search like? And also, like, why were they chosen? But what was that process like in getting the girls chosen for this particular version of the show?
In terms of the process, I actually hired a casting director, to women who are people of color, because I wanted to make sure that their perspectives influenced the casting. And they went out and scoured the nation in the beginning for all of the amazing stories that we could find. And then we really honed in on Southern California, so that these girls are all growing up kind of in the same area, but have very different experiences. And we interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people for the girls and for the parents. And it was really important that the parents and the kids had really great personalities, but also that they had unique, relatable stories that everybody could see in it. It was very clear cut, I think, to myself, to Paul, to Teresa, who the right members for this would be. And then with Maria, we interviewed a ton of different planners, and she overwhelmingly, and I actually think she's in the chat right now, so she's hearing compliments about herself, but she overwhelmingly stood out to us as somebody that could be fantastic for this, that was already doing this, that had the credibility. And I think all the girls in the families agreed.
And Teresa, do you want to add anything to that in terms of the casting?
Yeah, it was just very important for me from a showrunner perspective that each family had its own unique story, that we weren't repeating the same stories over and over again within the three interweaving things. And it was also important for me throughout the filming process that we were very true to what was going on in their lives. So, you know, with Hondo and Romy, you know, Hondo is a cancer survivor. And with Angelica and Celeste, like there's a clash between like, you know, what Angelica wants with like being modern and independent and her traditional minded mother. And then with Bailey, you know, like she grew up with a single mom, and then the challenges of her being a queen bee and all that. Very, very fun and interesting group of people.
For sure. I actually really like the girls, but did you, I'm assuming that there were some surprises, right? So you get like the basic idea of who these girls are, but did you have any idea that the mother would be so overwhelming in the storyline of her wanting it her way versus a young girl? Or did you kind of could sense that just in the interviews that you had with, you could tell that already?
I think RJ and his team were, you know, pretty lasered in on figuring who people out pretty quickly by the time, you know, Paul and I saw them. But, you know, when we finalized casting, we, you know, did have a lot of time in pre-production to really get to know the families and to really dig. And I didn't do it alone. You know, there's staff underneath me. You know, we're on the phones with them every day. Like, what do you really want? What does your mother want? What does your father want? What does your grandmother want? You know, everybody weighs in.
Yeah.
Families. Yeah.
One of the most telling things in the casting interview is not what they're saying, it's what they're not saying.
Saying,
So
yeah.
if
or the looks to the side, like, should I answer or not answer?
yes, well, it's the eyes also. When
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
my mom and I have a very unique relationship. We are very close. I just took her to Italy a few weeks ago, and we spent 10 days together. The glance, like the way that somebody's reacting, and sometimes you can tell that the parent is thinking, oh, I don't want my kid to say this right now, but they're being asked about, and the kid's asking for permission, or if the kid's just blowing through it and saying whatever they want, or if the parent is doing the same thing. All of the relationships are really unique and different. And for an example, Hondo initially was in the interview. We didn't meet Hondo's wife until we were doing further meetings with the talent, and she ended up being a great, and I say character meaning just like a great human being and really interesting perspective. And so you also discover some of those other people after casting happens, and they can be really pivotal to someone's story.
And I'll just add to that, RJ,
Yeah.
like in the case of Hondo's wife didn't really want to be involved or something, you know, and then they find themselves drawn to it, wanting to be part of the story. And they're always wonderful people to see on TV as well. People that don't actually want to be there and then find themselves there. They're amazing to watch.
Bring a whole new perspective, right? That,
Mhm.
yeah, that you may not have been.
Very honest. It's a very honest place they're coming from, because they're not trying to be a star or anything. They're just very present in this recording.
Right.
And that was actually interesting for this is in the past, in the older version, I was not involved in it, but it was really important for me and for our team to have non-influencers that were a part of this, because we wanted people to be able to relate. Once you have an influencer there who has a following and other sorts of things, it adds other sorts of complications that aren't necessarily fully relatable. And so these girls were all living in their hometown. We did casting through a lot of Quince communities, Quince magazines, Quince TikTok, Quince Instagram. We would infiltrate Facebook groups that were moms that were sounding boards for SoCal quinceañeras. And we would find people that way, not necessarily because they were an influencer, because all these girls were real girls and not people with the social following trying to do this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think one important thing to discuss is, as Latinx people, we actually get very, very few opportunities in television, either to create or to actually be on the air. And so your decision to possibly break new stars, right? Rather than, let's not go for the easy thing, which is people that are also already going to give us viewers, right? Because that's why you hire influencers, to bring people to your channel or to your show. But to actually use this as an opportunity, even though these girls may not be actresses, like in the way that we see actresses, but you open up so many opportunities by someone just being on the air of what these girls can actually accomplish in their futures.
Oh,
including a college education, by the way. Like, there's so many repercussions that can happen by you just making sure that you're using new talent in your series.
The phone calls to tell these families that they were a part of this were glorious. I was on every one of them. And we also go through, before they accept, what production is like on a show, because they're so new to this. And so we walk everybody through it, and what it's like to work on a TV set, what it's like to be involved with like the crew. Like, we're available to answer any questions because we want people to feel comfortable. But it was just great to hear these girls and their parents react to being a part of something that a lot of them watched since they were little kids, and they're still little kids, but like growing up.
And not only that, but you're actually doing something that is culturally positive versus culturally negative, which is usually what we get to see on the air. So this is something that is joyous. This is something that is celebrated. This is a girl becoming a woman. Like, there's so many positive aspects to the quinceañera culture and heritage, and putting that on the screen, I think it's equally important. So Teresa, I'll start with you, and then if somebody else wants to jump in, but you did mention that the quinceañera planner is here, and I actually did have a question about that. How was she chosen, or why was she chosen? That was one question. But I think more importantly for a lot of our students is to even have a conversation about including a planner, because I can tell you 99.9% of us cannot afford a planner. And so why was that decision made? Was it really to kind of like help production in a way where somebody is actually leading the process of a quinceañera? I thought she was actually really entertaining. I also thought she was fantastic in terms of really balancing the parent versus the girl, and making sure that the girl actually, or the teenager, has a say in it. So I thought she was really, really important. And I know that the show is aspirational. I'm just telling you, most people can't afford it. So how was that decision made, and why was she chosen? I think you talked a little bit about her already, that she was just like the clear winner. But if you can expand on that, Teresa, and maybe whoever else wants to jump in.
I think that Maria is important to the reboot of the series because she is narrating for the audience, for the Latinx community, as representing their voices multi-generationally, because she, has so many clients, has had over 10 years of experience doing this. And then I also really like working with her because she gets along so well with the kids, and, like, these aren't actors. So, a young person needs to feel comfortable opening up. And if somebody's very personable, like Maria, we can really open up and get into how they're thinking and how they're feeling, how they're really feeling, and capture those authentic moments. And in capturing those authentic moments and, showcasing it, I think that's what people want to see. People want to see something they relate to, whatever ups and downs a teenager is going through.
And
I thought it was interesting that she wasn't just a planner, she was also a dance teacher.
Yes, she choreographed.
She also
She was
forgot that
also a
one.
therapist. She was also a therapist,
therapist.
really. She was a lot of things. And to echo Teresa's point, I think we want the audience to be engaged, right? And I think the position that Maria took was she asked the questions that you're sitting at home asking at the same time. Why would she choose that color? Do you really like that dress? Do you agree with your mom? All the questions that you're asking at home, and a lot about entertainment these days is on the phone where you're able to engage or tweet back or something. So she represents that in our show. She sort of asks the questions that you're asking at home in real time. And I think that's one of her the huge valuable assets that we've got from her.
I also love that she I'm sorry, I'll get to you, RJ, just real quickly or I forget. I also like how she navigated in a very interesting way. The quinceañera that wanted to wear a fitted dress, right? And the whole time she's going like, there's no way she's gonna wear that dress. But the way that she actually managed to communicate with her and then put her in the right dress for the girl. Oh yes, I want the puffy dress. Sure, you know, I thought that was really great. RJ, you were going to add something?
Oh, the one thing that I want to say as well as for Maria, she works with people, like in terms of financially, like she's really good at like being able to work with a lot of different budget points. And so we actually did find, doing a lot of our research, that people were craving like an affordable quince planner. And I feel like she's very accessible to people, and that's why people end up hiring her too, is she's not overcharging for things. She's charging a very reasonable amount for people. But yes, you're getting a therapist, you're getting a dance teacher, you're getting a party planner,
Right.
you're getting a mediator, you're getting everything out of her. And we interviewed many quince planners across the nation. They did not have to be in Southern California. And we interviewed all different types of people, like the Hollywood, like hot shot, which it just doesn't make sense for the version of this show. We wanted somebody who's really known for doing this day in and day out. And when we found Maria Quince, fairy godmother, like that's a show. Like you just see that, and her personality was fantastic.
Great, thank you. You talked about her being able to work within a budget, and I was actually very curious about what was the contribution of Awesomeness TV in terms of these very elaborate quinceañeras. You know, like one thing I have found out from watching a lot of HGTV is that even though they do come in with a budget, right, for the renovation of the home, they have to put something up. There's all of these things that actually the network provides the family that gets chosen for the renovation to be able to afford it. And so I was curious about what was that, if anything, if you guys participated and contributed to the actual quinceañera, or how that worked, or are the girls paid actually to be in the show? Do they have to become SAG-AFTRA? Like all of those things, it'd be really great to kind of get a sense of just financially how all of this works and how they benefit from it.
I can tackle the cast members getting paid portion of it. Because we are a production, we are a non-union production because it is a reality unscripted show. And we do pay the girls because technically when they're showing up to set, they're working. So they have to get proper work permits through the state of California, which we help facilitate. They have to set up Kugut accounts to make sure that their pay is being distributed in a fair and equal way, where the parents are not commandeering all of the money. There are rules in place to make sure that happens. With that, we also have welfare workers on set who are making sure they're hitting all of their legal school obligations, because school is very important to us. We're Nickelodeon and Awesomeness. But because of all of that, the girls do need to be paid for their time. So they are compensated. The parents are compensated. The chambelans and other major people are compensated in that way, because again, it is technically working. So that covers that portion of it.
And with the other, either Paul or Teresa, would you like to talk about it? Like how, did you guys contribute to the quinceañera? Was that part of the production budget?
Yeah, we did contribute. You know, we work closely with the families, and, you know, in pre-production, we figured out what they wanted, and, you know, we helped, you know, we have put the dream in the quince.
Put the dream in the quince. You want to add anything to that, Paul?
No, I think it's always worth remembering we are making a TV show and we're putting cameras on things. So we just want things to be the best that they can be. So wherever necessary, we did contribute.
Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, I really, really love the backstories. I thought that was one of the, I mean, as a storyteller, obviously I'm a writer. I'm going to be much more interested in that, you know, like a story having a beginning, a middle, and an end, a story having conflict, you know, a story having a resolution, like all of those things, which you clearly took into consideration in the way that this show is developed. So I wanted to get a sense of if the backstory was kind of like a big aspect of how the girls were chosen. And I also wanted to find out if making sure that you have a difference in the girls, right? So you have like an absentee father in one of the storylines. You have a girl who is half Filipino, which I really loved, and that whole scene about choosing the food, just, you know, for the quinceañera. So I was curious about what was that process like? What eventually made you choose these three backstories to the girls? If you guys, maybe Teresa, if you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, these were already pretty present by the time RJ and his team came, you know, brought talent to us. And, you know, between me and Paul and other executives at Awesomeness, we kind of came to the conclusion and talked about whom we liked and whom we didn't like as much. And then we continued from there. But, you know, in pre-pro, we did try to dig as deep as possible. So we use the quince planning as sort of a bed to get into their deeper stories. So for example, you know, what happened with Angelica's grandmother, and how they wanted to honor her and incorporate, you know, her memory, and how we showcased how close their relationship was throughout the series.
Mm-hmm.
And the Filipino American cultural elements with Romy's family, and also that Hondo is not just a cancer survivor. He is a multifaceted, complicated person, and obviously a very talented dancer.
But also very present in his daughter's life, which
He's a
is also
great father.
another positive element that sometimes we hear that's not the case. And so seeing that reinforcement of fatherhood in this story, I think it's really important. And maybe I'm thinking as an adult, and the kids actually watching, they're not taking into any of this into consideration. But I'm telling you, I think like subliminal, it's like these images and seeing that and how present he is and how he gets down with her and dances and they do their own thing. I think it's very, very important for our audience.
He showed up to meetings days after pretty crippling cancer treatment, and you could tell behind his eyes that he was suffering, and you could tell that the family was going through a lot emotionally, but it was so admirable the way that he is present for his daughter. And we do like half an hour, 45-minute casting interviews with all these people, and then we edit them down to about 2.5 minutes. And part of what we do during casting is building these stories out so that they're very clear for people like Teresa and Paul and our executives when they watch them. It was really, we had some benchmarks that we wanted to hit with casting. So we did want to tell a story that was diversity within the Latinx and Hispanic community. So we looked at one point in Florida at Cuban quinces because the tradition is so different there. But we found the Filipino / Latinx story and thought that that was an actual, it's prominent. There's a lot of diversity within diversity. And there's also, we just noticed in a lot of the casting that were coming through, it was not fully Hispanic teens and families that were coming to us, but we loved seeing those other stories. It was something that's so common, but also we just didn't want to show the same cookie cutter quince over and over again. We wanted to find the human parts of the story that both parents and kids could relate to, or even people who don't have kids, whether they're in the community or not in the community. And we had overwhelmingly like 20 great families for this, but those three were the really curated, very different stories that existed.
There's
I
also a
think just
historical. Oh, no, go ahead, Paul. I was
I
just
was
gonna say, like, there's a historical aspect to Filipinos and Latinx people in California, by the way,
yeah.
because of the farm worker movement. And so that was actually really interesting for me to see beyond that, and how a lot of Filipinos actually consider themselves Chicanos,
Mm.
you know, and give themselves that name because of the historical, you know, aspect of farm workers in California. Paul, I'm sorry to interrupt
I
you.
was just going to add to complete the answer to your question, that the stories are always fantastic and RJ always delivers amazing stories. What we then sometimes look for on top of that are the actual personalities to make sure that they really do read on television, that the girl or the father or the mother are able to articulate their feelings in front of a camera. Because that's, if that doesn't work, no matter how good the story is, if it's not, and you're not going to manipulate it, they have to be able to tell their story. So without that being in place, none of it works. So I think that's the other element that I really look for, is the actual person and how they are able to express themselves.
By the way, was any of it scripted?
As in dialogue?
Yeah,
No.
or just
No.
like, you know, when they do their interviews on camera, do they have to be scripted at all, or are they basically just saying what they feel?
Teresa, I throw to you because you're in that room. Go ahead.
No, I have a list of questions I ask them. They have to introduce themselves. I ask them how they're feeling in the moment while they're picking flowers or they're picking dresses, and when they put their crown on, and backstories. And no, not really. I mean, in terms of the production aspect, we plan out our shoot. We are permitted within the city, our locations are locked in, those things are planned through. But once the cameras roll, I could maybe tell Maria, like, hey, we're starting to, you're meeting this family, like, how would you normally introduce yourself, and how would you do your consultation initially with the family, and go from there. And
Got
like, if they have a theme in terms of what traditional elements they want to incorporate in their quinces. So I mean, I'll talk to Maria about that, but I mean, that's not anything that, that's already something she does for her work.
Yeah. So talking about production, and I'm sure that we have quite a few students that are in TV and film in this chat. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit about what were some of the challenges in the shoot. That was the first question. The second one is, like, when you're doing docu-series, as is the case with documentaries, there's the movie you shoot and there's the movie that you edit, right? And sometimes those two can be completely different things. So I am actually curious about what are some of the gems that you may have found, in editing, that you may not have even been that aware in when you were actually shooting, but also just in general. Obviously, quinceañeras are big productions, and can you just talk a little bit about what was it like to go into production on something like this, and post-production? And Teresa, I think you're probably the best person for this.
I think for me, and this is not just unique to this show, I always wish I had more time.
Right. And what was the time actually? What from beginning to end of one quinceañera, or were you doing all three at the same time? I'm actually curious about that as
We
well.
shot it out all three at the same time and planned it all at the same time. So my staff and I, we were planning 3 quinces and planning the show. So it was fun, but it was it was a lot of work.
Craziness.
And we probably shot over a span of maybe 2 months. I don't quite remember. And we went into post-production right away, right after we were done with principal. And then, yeah, the challenges of the show, it's time. We're filming with kids. We don't, compare to some of the other shows I've shot with, like, we don't have as many hours filming with kids. So,
Right.
we're always up against time and how much content we can get for the day. And if we don't get it, like, what other storyline can we follow, and how do we pivot that?
And are the amount of hours that you have in docuseries the same as Unscripted series? Like, how many hours did you have the girls each day?
During the school day, I believe it was 5.5 that they were allowed to be
Have them
working
for
on
5.5.
set.
Okay.
And then on the weekends, I believe it was 7.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that might actually vary from scripted programming.
Well, and I think it's the same for scripted. I think it's because
7 hours on the weekend as well?
we were
Okay.
shooting with minors. Yeah, I mean, I think if we had shot in the summertime, and then they didn't have class, then we could have done 7 hours like the whole week.
So did you have like a producer assigned to each girl? Did you have a director assigned to each girl and a crew assigned to each girl? And then they
No,
were just
we have
shooting going at the
we have
same
the same
time?
crew. No,
Same
we have the same
crew,
crew.
wow.
Yeah, and then producers. I had 2 producers, and they helped me kind of dig into the deeper stories with the families, and they were kind of more boots on the ground in terms of daily contact with the families.
And in terms of like what you keep and what you toss, can you give us a sense of, how many hours you had that you were actually shooting versus what you actually ended up using? An estimate of that?
Well, we're a half-hour show, so we're averaging between 23 to 27 final TRT. And for every episode, I anticipate we probably had 35, 40 hours of footage to whittle down.
That's what I mean. Like, that's how important the editor is in documentaries and docuseries, because they can make or break your movie, right?
Yeah.
So that's amazing. This was just I was curious because I was sent 4 episodes, so I'm not sure how it ended, and I obviously don't want to spoil it for anyone that might be starting to view it as a result of this panel. But I was actually interested if any of the teen boys and their stories, like in the court, how much of their story or their perspective was reflected past the first 4 episodes, and if that even was a consideration for you guys.
I think there is. It depends on which quince it is. I think with Bailey, she had boys in her court, and she does have a boyfriend, so that is featured more prominently with her storyline as compared to like Angelica, who has an all-female court. So, but I actually really enjoyed shooting with all the kids. I think there was always a balance in the edit of having more kids, because I wanted our girls and our friends to watch the show and see themselves, rather than watch their mothers pick something with Maria. I'm sure that's probably more interesting to them to watch in terms of viewership.
I think we're going to open it up in just a couple of minutes. So I just want to ask 2 more questions, and then we'll get the students, because I think it's always better to hear from the students and what they're thinking about. But I'm curious about what you learned about quinceañeras that you did not know before you took this on, good or bad, by the way. And then I'm also curious if you move into a next season, if you're thinking about how can you open this idea of quinceañera, right? Is there any thought about doing a gay quinceañera, a chubby quinceañera, a girl who can only afford a $1,500 quinceañera? Like what are some of the things that you think you might be able to expand on the idea of a quinceañera as a result of this experience? But as we have people here who are not Latinos creating this show and greenlighting this show. So I'm interested in, like, what is it that you learned, or what is it that you appreciated culturally about this aspect of our culture?
Well, one of the pieces that I wanted to mention is we actually did a social companion piece called My Dream Quinceañera Never Too Late. And we followed a trans woman who never got her quince at 15 because at that point she was not aware of her identity in that moment. And so we actually shot something that that is airing on TikTok, YouTube, Snapchat, Instagram, and Facebook on October 20th. And we follow a woman who is not 15, who is older, who's getting a chance to celebrate. And it's really emotional, really transformative. So we have talked about it. We did have some stories come through. It's something that for me as a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, I think that those stories are really important. And if we had the right story, we would have included somebody in the first season beyond the social component.
Okay.
I wanted to address that one first before people got into what they learned.
Teresa or Paul?
I really enjoyed learning all of the Latinx traditions, like the shoe changing ceremony and all that. I mean, prior to the show, I am a big fan of the original digital format. And, I grew up in Southern California, so I have been to my share of quinces. So it is not
Quite aware of it.
Unfamiliar world.
Paul,
Yes.
and then just one additional thing, and maybe you can answer it first as well in addition to this, but I'm also very curious about how you guys feel about the traditional aspect of it. I think there's a lot of really great things about it, but it's like, do we really want to call girls princesses still? Do we still want to, like, some things just feel so old fashioned, I think, for teens nowadays, even though I think within our culture, we tend to really, gravitate to those traditions. I think part of it is because it's a reminder of home, wherever
Right.
it might be, Mexico or so. Anyway, I'm curious about that too, like the traditional versus modern aspect of a quinceañera. But
For
what
me,
you guys gained.
the
You're
tradition.
also British, right?
I'm British, right? I'm a lot of things on the. I tick a lot of boxes on this panel, but and I also live in West Adams, which is the Latinx community, right? So I live very much in it. And in terms of learning, I learned how serious the community takes this.
Yes.
And to answer your question, I think the tradition is super important. I think in this world that we're living in, without it, we're nothing. So I think we couldn't make this show if the families and the community didn't want to participate. And to RJ's point, we had an overwhelming response of people wanting to be in the show. One, because they trust it, because we trust the brand, and two, we present something positive. So I think for as long as the community wants to do it, we make it. It's not for me to say we shouldn't, or it's modern, or it's old fashioned. That's not really my call. I think if, the young girls want to do the princess bit, like, why not, and those that don't want to, don't have to. But I feel like tradition is like a thing that I'd like to, for now, in this crazy world that we're living in, hang on to, because it gives people a little bit of peace, a little bit of, security. And I say, why not? I think there's a lot to be learned from the Latinx community and the way they approach the quince and all the tradition that goes with it.
And to add on what Paul is saying, we followed the story. So if there was somebody that didn't want to follow specific traditions, we didn't. And if there were conflict in the mother-daughter or father-daughter relationships because of it, or even sibling relationships, we would follow all of that because it's real. And I think that it was so inspirational to hear about all of these different quinces and the way that they bend tradition, or if tradition is super important. And we would always follow that story on the show and would not intervene in any sort of way. And in that way, it's like a documentary more than it is a scripted reality show.
And I actually think the food changed in one of them, obviously, as a result of the girl being, half Filipino, half Latino. I also feel like the father-daughter dance was very different in one of the storylines. So I think that there are some breaking of tradition that is happening, just like organically based on what you said, who you had chosen.
And I think in a world,
the family.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I think in a world where we're all hoping for tolerance, right, across all genres, across all races, I think if I'm not able to see your culture, how am I able to learn about you? How am I able to understand you? Do you know what I mean? So I feel like it's super important that the tradition is upheld, so I can get to know, and you can curate it however you want to, but I need to learn from it because I'm not in it. And the same way that you would learn from a Black community or a Jewish community or, whatever. I think it's important not to dilute everything to the point where we're all one, but we're all nothing.
I always say there is commonality in specificity.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes networks tend to do the complete opposite. They want to be as broad as possible. And I keep saying, no, they're
Yeah.
going to find commonality the more
Yeah.
specific you are to a culture.
Yeah, like my
Teresa,
grandmother is the same as your grandmother. They might be talking about slightly different things, but the principle is the same, right?
exactly. Yeah. Teresa, I know that you wanted to say something and then we'll open it up.
Yeah, regarding the Prince Charming and all that, I let the girls take the lead. You tell me what you want, and I'll make sure I'm just here to document it, or Maria will help you execute it. You know, Romy had the opportunity to not wear a fat puffy dress, and she chose the fat puffy dress.
That's right. Because she had a good planner. Okay, so I don't think I'm the one that's handling the questions with the students. Somebody will jump in. Hi, Francesco or Francesco?
Whatever you'd like to call me, but Francesco, Chesco, Frank, Fran, any combination of those syllables. But yeah, first, thank you, Ligiah. And on behalf of the CSUEA and myself personally, I just want to thank you all for your time today. And also the people in the chat. It's been really great seeing all the interactions in there. But yeah, let's get into some questions. The first one here being from Luna, something I'm also pretty curious about. There's a lot said about what parts of the quinceañera that the celebrants are most anticipating, but on your guys' end, or some of the parts that you were looking forward to setting up and fully realizing?
Everything, all of the above.
Yeah.
The most important thing is to enjoy the process.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add on the...
Don't skip ahead to watch the quince parties. Enjoy the process. Enjoy the play along.
Yeah, like the dress choosing was always my favorite part.
Yeah. How about yourself, RJ?
Just because like I don't go into the field for this, I don't go into the production of this, so just to see the transformation was really nice to see that, but then also to see how these girls react to all of these cameras, because when we interview them, we interview them over Zoom, and sometimes people react really well when there's a camera on them, sometimes people shut down, sometimes people act differently in some sort of way when there are cameras all of a sudden, or sometimes the cameras exacerbate an existing problem that exists in the family. And to watch how they reacted to it, to see them glowing, to see them, going through things that teens and parents go through all the time was really interesting to watch, having known them since the beginning of the process.
On that note, do you ever give any of the, I guess this is maybe a question more for Teresa. Do you ever give the participants like any notes during the shoot, even though, you're aiming for authenticity? Do you tell someone to hold it back a little bit, to go a little more, for the cameras? Like,
no, I would only do something if something technical happened. Like if their mic pack dropped and I'm like, oh, can you say that again? We lost audio. So that was the only time I would intervene. But going back, to your previous question, I think it was really enjoyable for me to provide these experiences for these three girls. It's a chance for a teenager to make big decisions, whereas they've normally been steamrolled by their parents in the past. So it's like, we're really listening to them. Like, what do you want? What colors do you want? What food do you want? What kind of cake do you want? And I think going through that process, like, they feel empowered. And I noticed that they have evolved, towards the end, that it's a way for them to know who they are, So you have all these options, like, what defines you? What are you going to pick? And we don't really interfere with that.
Right. Another question here. What is one thing that would surprise the average viewer about the process of making reality TV?
The chaos. And how good it looks when you get it on camera.
I don't know. I feel like our audiences are really savvy these days.
Mhm.
You know, especially with the rise of social media, I feel like everyone kind of really, you know, they have a sense of awareness of what's going on, you know, and
Mhm.
they can tell if things are cheated and edited. I don't know. I feel like everyone's really smart these days, and you know, we shouldn't be dumbing anything down.
I will say, I think because Teresa, Paul, and I have worked in the unscripted space for a long period of time, I think maybe I think that one of the things that's surprising to people is how much effort goes into it, how many people are involved in it, how much prep happens, like how much conscious decision making is happening. I think that's surprising to people. And I always think that non-influencers, non-celebrities are always surprised at how draining the process can be at times and how much time they have to spend shooting with us. That's surprising at times. But a lot of work goes into this, especially when we have truncated production timelines.
Mm.
A lot of work goes into it. A lot of people spend a lot of time, and everything is very thoughtful. And so many people note things that by the time it makes its way to Paramount Plus or YouTube or wherever the Nickelodeon, wherever it's going, there's been so much work that people don't understand behind the scenes was done.
Great. Yeah. Paul, how about yourself? Do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I echo RJ. It's really hard. I'm only joking. No, but there is a lot of work that goes into it. We don't just turn a camera on and then just, you know, turn it around and put it on air. There's a lot of creativity that goes into making reality TV.
Right. Yeah. There is one aspect, just if I may ask a question of my own. There's one aspect of the show that was really interesting, which is, you know, who's the princess, who's the queen of the quinceañera, and I'm curious, what were each of your guys' reaction to that scene, you know, where you,
The mother?
yes, the mother, yeah, what'd you guys think about that and that idea of, you know, is it the daughter's party, is it the mother's party, that whole deal?
I mean, those moments, and I'll throw to Teresa, those moments for us from a producer's point of view, when you're in the field and the mother says that, you're like, this is reality gold. I mean, you can write this, right? This is what we want. We want genuine conflict that's not like dramatic, but just good and honest. And then Teresa, what do you think?
Well, I'm Asian, so usually the parents win. But I'm also Asian American, so I secretly root for all the girls.
I think I could be very wrong about this, but this is just what I was perceiving, having like done a lot of the interviews with these people and met the families. I think what happened is that it used to be the mom's quince, and it's a generational thing where now kids and Gen Z specifically, it should be their quince. That's how it should have been the entire time. But because the parents are used to their parent dealing with it, they have to fight the feeling that they didn't get their own quince. And so that's why a lot of parents then bring that into their teen daughters now. So I think we're actually seeing like a split right now where the whole time it should have been the teenage girl's quince. It's her coming of age, but it's a traditional thing that I think right now it's just, I think that's part of what the show, you saw that there is that real life conflict that exists, but it should be the girl's quince. It is their moment.
I also
Right.
think right now with social media, I mean, kids these days are much more opinionated than in the past. You know, they're looking on TikTok or Instagram. They're like, oh, I want that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Now one question here we have here that's I think really great. You know, you'd mentioned what is something you've learned about quinceañeras, but what is something you learned about people while working on the show, and but also over the course of, you know, your time working in reality television?
What have we learned about people?
Hmm.
I
God,
think,
how much time do you have?
yeah.
So much.
Let's see, about
a
10
lot.
minutes.
I think I've learned that people are far more vulnerable than you think they are. I think to really bare your soul in front of a camera, and you're not acting, it's you, takes quite a lot. But I feel like people are at the point where they will do it because they want to be heard. And that's what I've learned.
I think people are fascinating. And one of the things that I've learned over the course of my career is you never know what's going on inside someone's head and in somebody's life beyond what they're telling you. And I said something similar before, but a lot of times what someone's not saying or not doing or not bringing up is actually the more important story. So if there's a sibling who's not at a quinceañera, why are they not there? What's going on? Or if a parent wants to do something the kid doesn't, what's the psychology behind it? I think a lot of times people wrote off reality shows for a long period of time as like dumb and vapid, and they of course are at times. I've worked on some of those shows, but every single cast member of the show has signed up to be on a reality show. They have signed a contract, and there's a lot that people don't tell you. And there's a lot of like stuff that we can see that we're intuitive about, where you can see a family dynamic is very interesting. And again, I think the story is always about what people are not telling you and not what they're saying.
I feel that what I've learned in my time working reality TV is that most people and most families, they just want to better themselves. They want to create a better life for themselves and for their kids. And I find that to be a universal thread. And I've shot all over.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so this is just the way that they're using to be able to do that.
Yeah, whether you're competing for, $1 million on Survivor, or whether you're updating
Wanting to be a designer on Project Runway. That is so true. I also think, what Michelle Obama said, that the president's job did not change Barack. It reveals who you are. And I think to Paul's comment, I think like reality TV does that too. You think that it's going to change the person, but actually it really just reveals in many ways who that person is.
Yeah, I mean, you are the way you are, whether or not a camera's on you. There are,
maybe one more
Yeah.
question, Francesco, from.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we have one last question here from H. Kalza. Great question. With 35 hours shot, needing to be whittled down, how do you keep continuity among the segments that you put together?
We have writers in post and an edit staff. And so what happens when I go into post-production is we sort of look at all the scenes we shot and we card out the whole series. So we kind of reverse engineer what we shot. I mean, not too much on this show because what's going on is linear, with the quince. So that's what we do. So.
Right. Yeah. Anything else to add to that at all? All right. Sounds great. Yeah, I think that's going to do it on this student question. So, with that said, on behalf of the CSU Entertainment Alliance and all of our students and faculty, we want to give another huge thank you to Ligiah for moderating, and to RJ, Teresa, and Paul for being so gracious with their time today. And thank you to Mitzi and Paramount as well, who helped make this event happen for us. For everyone watching, please be sure to check out the resources and opportunities from the CSUEA on our website, csuentertainment.com, and our social media, which is at the CSUEA on all platforms. I'll also real quick link a little fun video I was a part of that we just put out yesterday. It was us reacting to some of the top meltdowns on the original showing of My Dream Quinceañera. So I'll just go ahead and link that in chat for you guys.
I love that. I'm going to send that to our team. That's amazing.
Oh man. I would love that. It's
Hi, everybody.
such an entertaining show. But yes, thank you again. Go watch the first 6 episodes of My Dream Quinceañera on Paramount Plus. And yeah, thank you all again for coming. And until next time.
And by the way, if you guys do you want to include the website for Awesomeness TV, or do you want to include any of that on the chat? It'd be wonderful if they.
Yeah.
Coming auditions or something like that would be great for our students to know.
Yeah, I think our TikTok is probably the best place to look because we're posting such a diverse range of content there. But yes, I will find it right now.
And it's on TikTok. It's just Awesomeness TV. Is it?
Yes, it's Awesomeness TV. There's a separate My Dream Quinceañera TikTok, and then we've got a few different spinoffs on TikTok. But you can find all of them. The Awesomeness TV account follows them. But we have a lot of different casting that's coming up, so we will keep you guys updated.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for being a part of this. It's always wonderful for our students to really get to hear from professionals and about shows or anything that you have going on. So I really appreciate you giving us the hour to share your experience in particular with this show. And for including us, for including Latinos in your programming. Thank you for that as well. Haley, did you want to say anything before we sign out?
No, I think Chesco covered it. We really appreciate everybody being here, and thank you so much for the time and effort that you all put into bringing this opportunity to our students. We really, really deeply appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good one.